I was stationed at the edge of the solar system and discovered a terrifying reality. I never should have opened that door. I still feel the chill creep down my spine when I think back to that moment. It was supposed to be just another day at the edge of the solar system, staring into the abyss of space, counting the stars. But then, everything shifted. The monotonous routine of monitoring incoming data was shattered by a presence I couldn't name, but I felt the weight of something unseen lurking just behind me. The control room was dimly lit, the glow of the screens casting eerie shadows on the walls. The faint hum of the machinery buzzed in the background, almost drowned out by the whispers I could have sworn were whispering my name. I rubbed my arms. The air inside the station felt colder than usual, like a winter wind had swept through, leaving the hair on my arms standing on end. Then came the noises: scraping, shifting, something crawling just out of sight. My heart picked up, pounding against my ribcage. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Just shadows dancing in the corner of my eye. But I knew. it wasn't nothing. The metal walls felt like they were closing in, the space so confined yet heavy with dread. As I moved to the door at the far end of the room, a flicker of movement caught my gaze. I froze, breath caught in my throat. A soft whimper broke the silence, followed by a low growl. My legs felt like lead, paralyzed by a fear that clawed at my insides. Don't be ridiculous, I told myself. It's just your imagination. But that thought faded the moment the door creaked, almost invitingly, but I hesitated. The darkness beyond loomed, pulsating with a life of its own. I could feel a sinister pull, like an unseen hand beckoning me forward. I inched closer, nerves tingling like live wires. There it was again, the growling, louder now, echoing through the space. It was a threat, an impending doom rising just out of reach. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. No way I could ignore the dread growing in my stomach like a storm. I turned the handle, my hand trembling. The door swung open, revealing a void that swallowed the light. I was met with a darkness thicker than the depths of space itself. The air smelled of rust and something foul, like decay mixing with the void. A low whisper called out, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. In that moment, everything inside me screamed to close the door, to retreat back into the safety of what I knew. But it was too late. A figure shifted in the shadows, a grotesque silhouette angling toward me. My heart stopped. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. What stood before me? Was it real? Fear paralyzed me, and I stumbled back. The door slammed shut behind me. Darkness enveloped me. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. I was enveloped in an abyss where the light faltered and shadows twisted with malevolent intent. The air thickened with an unspeakable dread, forming a tangible barrier against my attempts to push through the darkness. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen, a form that defied comprehension, yet was undeniably present. It loomed just beyond the reach of my eyes, sprawled across the void in grotesque contortions. With the door behind me slammed shut, I felt utterly isolated. The hum of the machinery faded into an eerie silence, as though the station itself held its breath. I stumbled deeper into the room, a cavern of terror that threatened to swallow me whole. My pulse echoed loudly in my ears, drowning out any rational thought. The whispers grew louder, calling to me, a symphony of voices steeped in despair and longing. Suddenly, a sharp clang rang out to my left. I jerked away from the sound, my heart racing as the darkness pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it were alive. I spun around, desperately searching for the figure that had haunted my entry into this shadowy abyss. Instead of the terror I half expected, I saw only twisting shadows melding and coiling against the walls, a distorted reflection of horrors I could not begin to fathom. Then I felt it, a breath, cold and fetid, brushing against the back of my neck. I whipped around, but my instincts betrayed me. Alone. Just me and the encroaching darkness. My eyes strained to see further, but all I could catch was the faint shimmer of what felt like 1,000 eyes watching from the depths, their gaze piercing and judgmental. That I turned to leave, and panic bubbled in my throat as the metal door had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of obsidian. A new sound began to reverberate through the dark, a slow scraping, dragging, like nails on metal. Tension twisted my stomach, something was coming. I darted in the opposite direction, the floor beneath me shifting as though the station itself had begun to warp. Every corner I turned masked an increasing sense of inevitability. The whispers had morphed into broken sobs, painful and haunting, wrapping around me like chains. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered to myself, desperately wishing I had stayed by the control panel, staring at distant stars and ignoring the pull of the void. As I stumbled further, a blinding light flashed against the wall opposite me, illuminating another figure concealed in shadow. Its form flickered as if caught between dimensions, one moment resembling a familiar face, the next twisting into a monstrous grin. A cruel parody of a friend or ally, it smirked at me, its jagged teeth glinting sharply. Panic surged through my veins, sending adrenaline rushing. This was no mere hallucination. With a sudden rush, it lunged, and I sprinted forward, narrowly escaping the grasp of shadowed fingers that seemed to reach out for my essence. I ran until the floor quaked beneath me and the walls constricted, and yet I kept going, driven by pure instinct. A doorway materialized in the distance, an echo of safety, but it trembled as I approached, collapsing in on itself like a mirage. Now the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, a torrent of voices filled with anger and sorrow. The air thickened around me, my breath heated as the temperature dropped. I could see them now, faces twisted in anguish, urging me to understand something beyond the realm of my comprehension. They clawed at the edges of my sanity, their mournful eyes filled with despair and betrayal. That I skidded to a halt, despair mingling with fury. "Leave me alone!" I screamed into the black, my voice lost among the turmoil. But the shadows thickened, swallowing my words as they surged toward me with renewed vigor. I felt the cold seep into my bones, freezing my resolve. Then it happened. A hand reached from the darkness, hot and vibrant against my skin, gripping my wrist with inescapable force. I turned to find not the figure I had feared nor the familiar face, but a different entity altogether, something more profound and otherworldly. It bore an aura of cosmic dread and whispered a word that resonated throughout the starless void, advancing closer. "Join us." And just as I opened my mouth to respond, a flash of blinding brightness erupted at the heart of the darkness, sending waves of energy crashing through. The shadows recoiled, recoiling into themselves. I staggered back, feeling the world underneath me shift as a newfound terror shook the very fabric of reality apart. Before I could process what was happening, I felt gravity loosen around my feet, and a deafening silence enveloped me. I was weightless, suspended in a chasm of fear, as the glimmering forms of those lost appeared all around me, their faces twisted in eternal torment. Something yanked my feet from beneath me, pulling me toward that radiance. I was falling, screaming, caught between the desperate cries of the lost and the inviting whisper of something ancient, ominously close. As my mind spiraled into a frantic panic, I knew whatever waited for me was far more horrifying than any darkness I had faced. My vision blurred, the light piercing through as I plunged deeper, but the grasping shadows reached for me, pulling me in two directions at once. I gasped, the weight of dread clamping around my chest as the light and darkness intertwined, twisting into something primal, something infinite. I knew then, with a bone-deep certainty, that I had yet to uncover the true horror of this realm, and the end of my reality was only just beginning. Then, the world shattered, and I fell into a void, where my mind screamed, and silence answered. The void clung to me, an oppressive shroud pressing against my very essence, and in that silence, I felt the weight of failure coursing through my veins like poison. The worlds that I had known floated away, the familiar stars now mere pinpricks of light swirling in an unrecognizable abyss. Time folded and bent like the shadows, each moment stretching into eternity as anguish wrapped tightly around my heart that I gasped for breath, but I felt no air, just the inexplicable urge to scream, to fight the darkness that sought to consume me whole. My surroundings were cold, and I could sense the throbbing pulse all around an organism fed by despair, thrumming with the torment of those lost before me. Then, from the edges of senses long forgotten, I caught them. Wispy figures wove through the darkness like smoke, tales of their despair whispered among one another. Their features were obscured, as if the darkness sought to erase their very existence, but their presence was palpable, radiating an anguish that chilled me. I wanted to reach out, to find a connection in this suffocating void, but the very thought sickened me. Were they allies, or harbingers of yet more terror? Their cries were muted, distorted echoes of once human voices that clawed at the edges of my sanity. They drifted close, drawn to the erratic rhythm of my racing heart, feasting on my fear. Each pulse of adrenaline unraveled them further, and the darkness quivered with malevolent anticipation. Suddenly, I felt a presence coiling around my throat, a tightening constriction that mirrored the grip of the station's shadows. It choked the very words I had struggled to articulate. "Join us" echoed in my mind again, more insistent, resonating through my bones. The shadows twisted in delight, waiting, mocking, as if my very identity had begun to splinter. In that moment, a wailing crescendo rose above the whispers. I turned, frantically searching in the depths for something, anything that resembled a way out. The figures swirled, faces contorting in agony, and with each glance, I recognized fragments of their lives in their haunting, supplicating eyes. The shadows fed on their grievances, dragging each soul deeper into the chasm of existence. "Help me!" I managed, the cry emerging as a hoarse whisper. I could barely recognize my own voice, distorted and weary. In response, the shadows deepened and twisted, transforming the nightmare into something even more insidious. A pallid grin stretched across the darkness ahead of me, taking shape, a figure emerging from the abyss, mirroring my own features but rendered grotesque. My doppelganger sneered with a malevolence both familiar and alien, its mouth moving in a way that felt too real. It wasn't just a vision, it was a reflection of my very soul twisted into a taunting mockery. Escape? It laughed, a sound that was mirthless and echoing, reverberating through the cold emptiness. There is no escape here, only the endless cycle of suffering. With each syllable, my heart dropped further, overwhelmed by despair compelling me to succumb to the shadows. As the spectral form took a step toward me, I felt an electric jolt, an aversion so intense it made me stagger backward. Its dental arch gleamed with sharpness, shining with the light of anguish. "You're one of us now," it whispered, a symphony of voices merging into one dreadful chant. The darkness around me rippled violently as the other lost souls drew closer, each reaching out with hands stretched towards my fading light. I pivoted, racing through the nebulous expanse, desperate to escape the suffocating grasp of my sinister counterpart. But as I tore through the shadows, I felt a pair of icicle fingers grip my ankle, dragging me down, scraping my skin against the cold, unyielding surface. A chorus of wails rose in pitch around me, horrified that I might slip away. Frantic, I pulled against them, visions spinning in my mind. Where could I go? What could I find amidst this endless void of despair? Suddenly, the swirling darkness coalesced, forming a new shape, an opening, a rift pulsating with an eerie glow. Could it be a way out, or a gateway into further horrors? With desperation fueling my flight, I lunged toward the rift, but the shadows gripped tighter, each fleshless whisper urging me to stay, to surrender to the void. "You belong here," they cried, pleading and accusing in unison, their frayed tones echoing through the tangible agony. The darkness erupted in protest as I broke free, the pull of the rift intensifying in a blinding surge. I felt fragmented, my identity fraying like the edges of a tattered cloth. I was almost there, the rift loomed larger, illuminating my path with pulsating radiance, beckoning. But even as I reached for it, I heard a gut-wrenching cry rise behind me, the realization that those souls were not done with me yet, their lingering energy tethered to my very essence. Just as I stepped forward into the glow, the tormented figures unleashed a final scream, the sound cutting through my mind, shattering my resolve. The shadows clung to me, desperate fingers reaching for my flesh, pulling me toward their despair, and with that, I surged into the light, feeling the shadows tear at my essence, and in that fleeting moment, I glimpsed the truth, 1,000 eyes watching in anticipation, waiting for my final choice. Then the light imploded, the rift closing with a thunderous crack, swallowing everything into an oblivion that left only echoes of my existence behind. The last thing I saw was my own anguished reflection in the darkness, grinning back at me, before I was thrust into the unrecognizable beyond, trapped once more between light and shadows. And then, silence fell like a shroud, and I knew I was no longer alone. In the aftermath of that explosive implosion, when light folded in on itself, I was enveloped by a stifling confusion that made every nerve in my body pulse with a peculiar ache. The edges of my vision flickered uncertainly, teasing a reality that felt simultaneously familiar and unnervingly alien. I blinked, straining to clear my mind, but still I could feel the remnants of my dread swirling like debris in a tempest. The silence was deceptive, an unbroken quiet that felt heavy, a silence that could choke. My heart thudded ponderously in the chest, its rhythm echoing in the void surrounding me. Where was I? Had I truly escaped, or was this merely another layer of the same intricate nightmare? I strained my ears against the abyss, listening for the whispers that had once suffocated me, the cacophony of lost souls, yet now there was nothing but the hollow sound of my own breaths, dampened against the expanse. As I began to steady myself, marveling at the absence of those chilling figures, an oppressive feeling washed over me, a sensation reminiscent of being watched. The air shifted subtly, and I sensed it, the weight of unseen eyes boring into me through the darkness. I turned slowly, scanning the periphery, an instinct crawling beneath my skin, warning me of looming danger. Then, with a flicker of illumination, specters emerged from the void, coalescing into shapes, hunched figures cloaked in shreds of twilight fabric, gnarled hands clutching at slivers of shadow. Their faces twisted into expressions of unholy rapture, mouths stretched wide in smiles that revealed too many teeth, jagged and glistening. I stumbled backward, heart racing, as they surged closer, eager hunger etched into their grotesque features. "Join us," they chorused in a dissonant harmony, the sound curling around me like whispering vines. Their voices resonated not just in my ears but in the core of my mind, weaving through thoughts, echoing in fears I had long buried. I wanted to scream, but no sound erupted, only the hollow comprehension that I was trapped within their grasp, another player in their twisted game. In my attempt to escape, I tripped over a jagged stone that jutted from the ground, sending me sprawling. When I hit the ground, I felt an icy tendril curl around my ankle, pulling me further into this nightmare landscape. I kicked out against it, my instincts clawing for liberation as panic took the reins of my mind, but the urgency of survival was overshadowed by an unfathomable weariness. Memories surged back, fragmented visions of the unspeakable, countless faces pleading for release, their eyes glimmering with the same despair I now harbored. Desperation clawed at my throat, tightening me like a noose, and in that moment, I understood the truth of their wretched smiles. They were not feral creatures but harbingers of despair, ushering me further into a reality that needed no more souls to feed. Yet the chilling truth settled heavier: escape was not within my reach. I struggled in the grasp of the entity at my feet, its touch denser than the very darkness that consumed it, and I looked up just in time to see the figures closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on my anguish with an insatiable hunger. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos, penetrating the veil of despair, a voice that made my heart lurch. "You must not let them bind you. Fight." The command was clear, fierce, a jolt of clarity amidst the shadows. I turned to find the source. A woman stood before me, radiating a faint, spectral glow that pierced the oppressive darkness. But there was something off. Her form flickered and pulsed with erratic energy, as if she were not entirely part of this realm. "Who are you?" I gasped, recognition sparking fear within me. Her eyes swelled with an urgency, pleading for me to comprehend the terror that loomed. "They'll devour your will. Trust me, your freedom is just beyond this veil." She pointed to a distant glimmer, a haze of shimmering light perched precariously at the edge of the shadows, but there was no time for deliberation. The shadows pressed closer. Their hunger palpable, whispering accusations wrapped in promises of solace that made my skin crawl. Despair tore at the fabric of my being as I faced the figures around me. Should I trust the spectral woman, or allow the relentless shadows to swallow me whole? Choose. Her voice crackled, half washed away by the ensuing screams of the figures as they lunged toward me. Choose, before it's too late. In that blinding moment of confusion, I felt the ground beneath begin to shift, the shadows pulling back as if anticipating my response. The glow beckoned, a siren call that filled me with both terror and hope, and I realized the truth of my circumstances. I could either remain trapped in this abyss, bound by despair, or risk everything for a chance at salvation. With renewed resolve, I made my choice, a heartbeat away from madness. But as I turned toward the hope of escape, darkness erupted with a ferocity that stole my breath. The ground trembled, and haunting faces emerged, their eyes widening in horror as a singular figure broke away from the mass. It was me, a twisted reflection of my being, a physical manifestation of every ounce of fear and doubt I had ever carried. This doppelganger bore an expression so devoid of humanity that it rattled my bones and sent me reeling. As it raised its hand, I felt the electrifying pull of attention, my body caught between realms, facing a choice that struck at the very heart of my existence. "Let us take you home," it hissed, words slithering like poison, the shadows closing in around us. The spectral woman stood defiantly against the encroaching figures, her light dimming yet flickering with untamed determination. "You can't let it win," she screamed as the ground shifted at my feet, images flashing before my eyes, every moment of my life twisting and folding in on itself. But just as I steeled my resolve, prepared to flee toward the glimmer of light, a jagged crack erupted beneath me, splitting the earth and revealing an unfathomable void that grasped hungrily at my feet. In that fractured moment, with the chaos of their shrieks surging like a tide, I faced a choice: to leap into the unknown, toward the precipice of salvation, or be swallowed by the darkness that hungered to lay claim to my very soul. With one final, desperate breath, I stepped forward into the glowing abyss, prepared to confront whatever awaited. Even as a chilling laugh echoed around me, the laughter of shadows, mocking my choice, calling me back into despair. The instant my foot crossed the threshold into the shimmering light, the world around me collapsed into chaos as if the fabric of reality was being torn asunder. I was immersed in a maelstrom of colors and sensations, warmth wrapping around me like a blanket, even as the howls of the shadow figures ricocheted off the walls of my mind. For a fleeting moment, I felt liberated, soaring beyond the weight of despair that pressed upon me. Yet that relief decayed swiftly. Tendrils of darkness erupted from the void I had escaped, lashing out, seeking to reclaim what had ventured too far from its grasp. As the warmth faded, the glow morphed into a blinding radiance that stung my eyes, twisting into grotesque shapes that mocked the very essence of light. I fell, wrestling against the sensations, plunging deeper into the glow until I was engulfed entirely. For every step I thought I took toward escape, the light grew dimmer, dulled by the insistent shadows clawing at my heart with desperate longing. I barely registered the cacophony of cacophonous laughter that crescendoed around me, growing louder as if by the sheer will of the darkness itself. When I finally landed, it was not on soft ground, but instead, I found myself sprawled across a surface that felt alive beneath my fingertips, a pulsating mass of heat and sensation. Panic bubbled within me, swallowing my breath whole. I lay there, heart pounding like thunder as the realization sunk in. I was not alone. From the ambient glow, whispers thrummed through the air, strings of sound weaving narratives that scraped against the edges of reason. I slowly rose to my feet, and in that moment, I was surrounded by what could only be described as husks, figures shrouded in luminous vapor, their shapeless forms almost ethereal. Each of them bore expressions of longing, draped in a veil of sorrow that echoed my own. "Help us," they murmured, voices like a haunting hymn, resonating within me, wrapping me in a chilling embrace. Their hollow echoes pressed against my heart, reminding me of every obliterated hope, each loss that had ever weighed upon my soul. "What do you want from me?" I croaked out, the words scraping against the despair lodged within my chest. The figures drew closer, their translucent hands reaching out as though they were grasping at threads of fate. "Before the shadows consume you, free us!" They cried in unison, and I recoiled, stepping backward into the encroaching haze, horrified. A remembrance flickered in my mind, the spectral woman and her desperate plea. I couldn't abandon her, not now. The husk figures twisted into faces I recognized, echoes of my own past misfortunes, memories that surged like specters across my vision. Friends I had lost, dreams that had withered away, whispers of guilt that clung uncleanly to my skin. The shadows around me flickered, drawn to my distress like moths to a flame, encroaching upon the light. As I fought to hold on to my last vestiges of hope, I felt the familiar sensation of icy tendrils wrapping around my ankles once more. The shadows squeezed, squeezing tightly like a snake coiling around its prey, and simultaneously, the husks moaned, their pleas amplifying, wrapping around me like chains forged from anguish. "Join us!" they wailed, their voices merging into a horror-laden symphony. "Release your pain. We can take you home." Home. I choked on the word, thrumming with the definition, so close yet so far away. I looked up, searching for the spectral woman, her light flickering like a candle caught in a tempest. The shadows danced hungrily around us, their forms blurring together, indistinguishable in their unified greed for my essence. "There's no home here," I gasped, my voice barely rising above the clamor of the phantoms. "Not with you." In response, the figures shifted, their crowd growing thick and voracious. Desperation clawed at my throat as I stumbled back against the pulsating ground. In that dissonance, I caught a glimpse of a door, an outline wavering behind the suffocating haze, a portal that promised to reach beyond the madness enveloping me, but as I turned toward it, the icy fingers of darkness tightened their grip, dragging me down to join the husks, while the laughter of the shadows rang clearer, cruel and mocking in the depth of the abyss. "No! This isn't the end!" I screamed, feeling a war rise within me, yet it felt both futile and rampant, an inner rebellion amid the gathering storm. Just as I readied to charge the door, a piercing shriek erupted from the shadows, resonating through the very atoms of reality. The air vibrated with anguish and anger, and I saw it, an army of darkness rallying under a new figure that rose from the depths, a gargantuan silhouette with swirling vortexes for eyes, an avenger of the shadows. "You think you can escape?" it boomed, voice resonating with dread. And with one final surge of horror, I found myself thrust toward the gateway of light, my body weightless as the darkness pulled me back, revealing the unforgiving truth: I was no longer the arbiter of my fate but the unwilling pawn in a game far older than the world itself, for within that doorway, salvation knelt entwined with untold horrors beyond. With every ounce of dread, I hurled myself toward the glow just as the shadowed figure whispered, dripping with malevolence, "Welcome to your eternal damnation." And then I fell into the blinding light that promised salvation, trembling on the brink of either freedom or a fate worse than any hell I could imagine. As I plummeted into the blinding light, the world around me fractured yet again, transforming into jagged shards of fluorescent color that sliced through my vision. Time twisted and warped in this agonizing descent, each fleeting moment stretching into eternity. My body turned to liquid terror, a cocktail of fear and adrenaline, as the echoing laughter of the shadowed creature reverberated in my ears, taunting me with a grotesque harmony of doom. Then, an abrupt impact against an unseen surface jolted me back to reality, a cold, hard ground that grounded me in a teetering balance between relief and horror. I blinked furiously, my vision clearing to reveal a scene that sent shivers crawling across my skin. The light around me dimmed, maintaining just enough glow to illuminate the grotesquely twisted landscape stretching before me. I was trapped in a vast expanse of dark earth and rotting vegetation, a place that mirrored a forgotten world but heavily tainted by decay. Sparse trees twisted skyward like desperate fingers reaching for the heavens, their bark blackened and oozing an iridescent sap that shimmered in the pale light. Jagged rocks littered the ground, and a rancid mist slithered along the base, writhing like serpents ready to strike. Ghostly voices lingered on the edges of my mind, weaving through the dirt like wisps of smoke, and the air buzzed with a haunting melancholy that set my teeth on edge. "You shouldn't have come here," a whisper rustled through the leaves, drawing my focus to a figure standing in the distance. It was the spectral woman, her silhouette cloaked in a veil of shimmering light, though now it seemed interspersed with shadows that clung to her like parasites. "Go back!" she cried, but the warning was laced with an urgent terror that struck deep within my heart. "What? Why?" I shouted, scarcely believing the sound of my own voice amidst this desolation. "Stay away from the trees. They are hungry." As she said those words, the ground trembled, and the trees around us groaned as if responding to a summon, a monstrous yearning stirring beneath the surface. I hesitated momentarily, drawn to her presence like a moth to a flame, the warmth of her light calling to my aching soul, but the shadows swirling around her lengthened and thickened, coiling upward like nightmarish vines. She lifted a hand, her fingers trembling, and I could see the light flickering more violently, as though racing against the encroaching darkness. In that terrible instant, a scream erupted from a nearby thorny formation, splitting the air with a raw, anguished cry. It echoed through my body, deepening the chill that had crept into my bones. I turned toward its source, a gnarled tree shuddering violently, its bark splitting and shriveling away to reveal a face twisted and contorted, howling for release. Roots dug into the ground around it, thrashing as though attempting to pull themselves free from the earth that enslaved it. "Please! Help me!" The creature wept, its voice a parched whisper, tinged with fear and desperation. "They'll put you in here with me." The woman's form flickered dangerously as if the very shadows that chased me were grasping at her as well. I could feel the pull to help, to rush towards that tortured mouth of bark, but the knowledge of danger swamped me. What if I joined its horrors, swallowed whole by the tree's sinister cravings? The sound of snapping branches accompanied my indecision, and I turned in horror as dozens of the skeletal trees began to sway ominously, their branches looming closer, hungry for my lifeblood. The air thickened with dark ecstasy, an unseen force whispering, "Join us, there is no escape, surrender." The woman's eyes pierced through the encroaching darkness, desperation evident, a warning wrapped tightly in strength. "Run! You can't save them!" she screamed, her body wavering as if caught between worlds. Yet I stood paralyzed by fear, caught in a web of despair, my heart racing dangerously as shadows pooled around me. The trees began to roar, expelling more screams of unbearable agony, a cacophony that drowned out all reason. And in that dreadful moment, they converged upon me, their lust for my essence palpable in the chill that seeped into my flesh. I stumbled backward, my hands brushing against the cold, damp earth until a horrific impulse surged within me, a frantic recognition. I lunged toward the spectral woman, hoping against hope that we could break through together. But just then, a vicious root erupted from the ground, snaring my ankle in a vice grip and pulling me down. "No!" I screamed, ineffectually grasping at the warmth of her fading light through the mental fog. She stretched toward me, desperation sparking in her own ethereal form, and I caught only glimpses of her horror, her shimmering limbs contorted by shadows, flaying her away from the last threads of hope. The trees celebrated my capture with guttural chants, their joy creating a choir of despair that echoed through the shadows. I felt my spirit splintering as the darkness pulled tighter, and just then, as despair threatened to overwhelm me, the earth below rippled, cracks branched out like veins in the soil, and several of the trees fell silent, their branches poised like decrepit fingers. A realization hit me, harsh and electric: maybe, just maybe, the shadows had more to fear than just my inevitable surrender. "Run!" I roared one last time, a raw urgency infused with raw terror and longing, and I sensed a flicker of movement, something great stirring beneath the surface, but before I could dive deeper into the shadows, the roots constricted, dragging me downward into an abyss not of my choosing, a fate entwined with horror I had barely begun to comprehend. And as darkness consumed my vision, I felt the earth breathe behind me, whispering secrets of the unspeakable as weightless screams surrounded me like a thrumming pulse, reminding me all too clearly that this was far from over. The weight of darkness bore down upon me, pressing tight against my skin like a shroud. I gasped for air, but the mist clung to my lungs, constricting my breath with its icy tendrils. As I was pulled down into soil that pulsed like a living creature, I was met with an overwhelming stench of decay, a mingling of earth, rot, and something far more sinister. The roots of the trees writhed around me, squeezing harder and entwining tighter while fragments of my consciousness fractured beneath their grip. In that terrifying abyss, I felt time slip away, each second stretching into an eternity. The spectral memories of the woman above lingered like a sweet echo, sharpening the fear gnawing at my insides. What would become of her? Of me? I fought against the roots' relentless grasp, desperation fueling my movements. The shadows whispered sweet nothings directly into my ear, a symphony of anguish woven with my own heartbeat. Suddenly, I broke free of the roots' embrace, gasping as fresh air flooded into me like a violent tide. I fell onto a twisted landscape that resembled a dark cave, itself filled with whispers and groans. There was no source of light, not from above, not from within, only the muted glow of an azure orb nestled at the far end of this hellish crypt. I scrambled forward, propelled by the hope that this weightless blue might lead to salvation, but as I moved deeper into the cavern, I quickly learned that the shadows had not relented. Wisps twisted into humanoid forms, their features exaggerated, eyes like black pits and mouths that twisted into impossibly wide grins. They shifted and undulated, beckoning me closer with their elongated fingers, a chorus of sound spilling from them that resonated with the hurt of those trapped within the trees. Join us, the hum of their voices carried a haunting cadence, unsettling yet enticing. I shook my head violently, desperate to clear the enveloping fog. But those faces stole into my thoughts, flickering like dying embers and reminding me of the woman's desperate plea. They possessed a terrifying allure that ignited a longing deep within me, a desire for connection in this desolate wasteland. As I neared the orb of light, I glanced back at the thrumming shadows, too close for comfort. Something primal erupted within my chest, raw, unyielding panic drove me forward toward the blue luminescence that glimmered like a beacon of hope. When I reached the orb, it pulsated against my palm, cool and soothing, as if it could sense the layers of fear that caked my soul. I could feel a surge of energy radiating from it, nearly overwhelming my senses. And then the brightness flared, filling the cavern with a light so intense, I nearly fell backward, blinded by its power. Drawing my hand away, I watched in horror as the shadows recoiled, shrieking in dissonance at the warmth of light that chased them back into their corners. But in that moment of clarity, something emerged from beneath the surface of the orb, dark tendrils like vines, twisting and probing as they wriggled, seeking a connection. No! I screamed, stumbling back against the cold wall of rock. The shadows seized the opportunity, lunging with newfound vigor. They moved with terrifying swiftness, capable of drenching the air in a suffocating despair. I could feel my resolve shatter beneath their onslaught. Their grotesque faces morphed into pained expressions, revealing glimpses of the imprisoned souls inside them, souls that were as tortured as that of the gnarled tree. They began pulling apart, fingers stretching like claws, yearning for a taste of my essence. The orb flickered, a languid pulse communicating messages I was unable to grasp as it shrunk back into itself, revealing a gaping maw of darkness where something vast and terrible slumbered. I turned back just in time to see one of the shadows grasp for me, its fingers brushing against my arm. The touch was ice stabbed with fire. And then a sound, a cacophony of horrors, erupted around me. A voice boomed, the deep, resonant growl of something ancient that had lain dormant for far too long. Release me! It thundered, a shred of agony woven into the demand, and the cavern trembled in response. Suddenly, the floor quaked beneath my feet, the obsidian ground splintering and cracking wide open. I teetered on the brink of endless darkness, suspended above an abyss filled with countless eyes, each mirroring the terror that gripped my own heart. With one final, plaintive cry, the orb faded from sight, plunging the cavern back into suffocating shadows just as a monstrous form surged forth from the void, a twisted amalgamation of tree roots and sorrow, hungry and unyielding. Its maw framed my last view of light, before chaos ensued, and just then, the ground beneath me collapsed, and I plummeted into the depth of fear that awaited, a world where the line between pain and release threatened to blur, and where unspeakable horrors lumbered forth with my name on their trembling tongues. Falling through the void, my mind raced with fragments of memories that flickered like failing lights. I grasped at intangible thoughts, faces I recognized, voices I might have once known, all dissolved into a cacophony of fear and confusion. The weight of the shadows pursued me, their piercing whispers clawing at my psyche, urging my descent into insanity. Then came the impact, a collision with something gelatinous, thick as molasses, that enveloped me whole. I struggled for breath, but the substance clung to me, seeping into my lungs and wrapping around my limbs like living chains. Panic surged within. I forced my way through the murky more like viscous, unholy substance, my body thrashing wildly as I fought against its suffocating embrace. Straining against my panic, I recalled the snatches of air above, the glimmer of the orb flickering like a dying hope. Those shadows would not allow me the luxury of escape. My eyes darted around, desperate in this darkness, and caught on shapes shifting through the murk, a world pulsing with a life of its own. I was submerged in a grotesque parody of a dream where the imagined horrors of the past were given grotesque forms to haunt me. Still grappling with the nightmare, I caught sight of distorted faces emerging from the abyssal goo, faces that twisted and warped, reflecting the pain I'd experienced moments earlier. They clutched at me, suspended within this hellish fluid, mouths agape in soundless screams as if begging for release, trapped in a perpetual cycle of torment. Their hollow eyes were endless voids, canvases showcasing every grievance they bore. No. Please. I choked out, I'm not one of you. But as I fought, I felt the curses of the shadows washing over me, their presence overwhelming, whispering to me in an intimate tone that echoed with a twisted familiarity. You're one of us now. Accept it. I recoiled at their words, but as I scrambled through the thick substance, I sensed a powerful force slithering through the surroundings, weaving between the hanging threads of despair. It was what had been awakened when the orb had faltered, and now it was searching, prowling with insatiable hunger. Ahead, through the suffocating darkness, a faint light blinked, distant yet enticing. I pushed toward it, the grip of the substance loosening but pulling me back at every attempt. As I approached what I initially believed was salvation, I caught my breath, my heart pounding like war drums in my ears. The light flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced like demons flitting in and out of existence. And when I saw it, a doorway, framed in ethereal likeness. It beckoned with a sense of yearning, beckoned with the promise of safety and escape, though I knew deep down that it could just as easily lead to my final demise. Then, I felt the force gathering behind me, a building pressure that sent a rippling wave of cold terror through me. I turned, my hair standing on end, as the shadows slithered closer, their forms grotesquely deforming as they advanced. No longer whispering but crying, a discordant symphony of voices melding into one, the torment was amplified. You cannot escape. I could no longer differentiate between the living shadows and the specters of despair. They merged into a singular fear, a terrifying tapestry of past and future horrors. That I lunged for the light, throwing myself through that shimmering threshold, but not before the first anguished scream reached my ears. You cannot. You must not. I tumbled through the veil and landed hard, gasping. I found myself on grass, a stark contrast to the viscous hell I'd just escaped. But when I glanced back, the doorway had closed, a shimmering veil coating the place where it had once been. A sense of false triumph surged but was abruptly snuffed out. What lay before me was an unfamiliar expanse, twisted trees looming above, their gnarled branches stretching down as if wanting to cradle the ground of their domain. The air vibrated with hidden dangers, and I stood alone, the eerie silence deafening. But then I felt it, a presence. Lurking, hidden, watching me. As I turned to flee, the ground trembled beneath me, and the forest rumbled in response. A mass of shadows poured forth from trees, contorting into familiar shapes, and I realized too late what was happening. They had released something worse than themselves. And then from behind me, the voice replied, this time resonating with a sinister familiarity, a whisper curling into my ear, welcome back to your true home. The horizon shifted, the moon bowed with a ghastly face, and an inky darkness enveloped everything around me, wielding horror wrapped in betrayal. In that heart-stopping moment, I turned to face the nightmare anew, realizing it was not only the shadows that had changed, but I had become something unrecognizable as well. The smothering silence of the forest thickened, wrapping its limbs around my throat like an unyielding noose. Shadows clung to the trunks of the trees, looming ever closer, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing like a caged beast. I could feel the overwhelming pull of the darkness behind me as if it were a living entity, keen to swallow me whole. "Welcome back to your true home," the voice repeated, an echo of a lie wrapped in comfort. It was seductive and sickening, like a siren-esque call from the depths of the abyss. I turned my gaze toward the shadows, and their shape began to solidify into something grotesque, their forms twisting into amalgamations of my own fears, a half-remembered nightmare now manifesting in flesh and shadow. Faces morphed from the void, twisted smiles creeping across their grotesque features, their mouths curling into the eerie approximation of familiarity that I staggered forward, adrenaline surging through my veins. The taste of dread was metallic on my tongue, a gory sign that warned me I was not just being pursued, they knew me. They were fragments of my past, the forgotten pieces of myself that I had abandoned in my search for solace. Ghosts I had wronged, people I had failed, drawn from the very fabric of my being, they emerged to mock my every misstep. "Why?" I shrieked into the maw of torment, choking on the words as they slithered out. "What do you want from me?" Their responses were a collective hiss, like rustling leaves turning into jagged whispers that seamlessly intertwined with the fabric of the night. "To show you the truth," they said, an echo of multiple voices stretching across eternity. Fueled by desperation, I bolted deeper into the twisted forest. It felt like running through a labyrinth where every tree was a sentinel, biding its time. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and damp earth, stinging the inside of my nostrils. I could hear the rustle of movement behind me, footsteps, or were they claws? Pick up their pace. They were relentless, a pack of phantoms ripping through the fabric separating their world from mine. The moon hung low, casting its veil of pale light across the undergrowth, when I caught sight of it, an altar, wrought of obsidian stone, pulsating with a sickly glow. It emanated dread and allure, a grotesquerie that felt both inviting and eerily familiar. As I approached, shadows rose around it, forming shapes that quivered between recognition and horror. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to confront whatever awaited me there. Perhaps it was the last chance to disentangle myself from this nightmare, but as I stepped closer, reliving my past amongst the ghastly figures, the ground beneath shifted and buckled like a living creature. I felt the earth clamoring for something, my flesh, my very essence. My breath quickened, instinct urging me to escape, yet my feet felt rooted, compelled by the power of the altar to kneel before it. My fingertips grazed the obsidian surface, and a surge of horror crashed into me like waves against a fragile cliff. Visions struck like lightning, memories long buried, stained in guilt, parading before me with agonizing clarity. Each visage throbbed with suffering, echoes of my past indiscretions resurfacing from forgotten realms filled my mind. "No!" I gasped, yanking back my hand. But the shadows lunged with fervor, a tide of wrath surrounding me. They twisted into monstrous figures, elongating into grotesque visages that beckoned me closer, their whispers clawing at my sanity. "It's not over. You belong here. You will remember, or you will perish." With every heartbeat, another face of my past materialized, each more horrific than the last, the faces of the lost, the abandoned, the loved, and among them was a figure that made my heart freeze. A child, looking up at me with wide, unblinking eyes, eyes that once had sparkled with laughter. "No!" I screamed. The world around me warped as the shadows laughed in malicious delight, their hunger palpable, a chasm wide open at my feet, threatening to consume me whole. The child's figure flickered like a dying light, the shadows encroaching further, wrapping around her as I lunged forward, desperate to pull her out. "Please. No!" I cried, but before my hands could reach her, the shadows swallowed her whole, and in that moment, I understood something had been awakened in me, a part one had long tried to suppress. A revelation washed over me, breaking through the layers of dread. It was choice distilled into agony. "Join us!" They howled, their voices rising to a fever pitch, a cacophony of mocking despair, shattering the barrier between my soul and the darkness that I was losing ground. The shadows surged forward, engulfing my limbs. The child's laughter echoed through my mind, taunting me with memories of what I had lost. Panic surged as realization clawed at me. This was not just my fight, it was a reckoning. I stood at the precipice of destiny or doom. What do I need to do? I gasped, surrendering to the shadows that gripped me tighter, but their answer was drowned in a final screech of delight, reverberating through the night air, as the darkness shifted again, growing and pulsating, prepared to reveal something even darker than before. Before I could process, the ground beneath buckled, and the obsidian altar shattered into pieces, revealing a gaping maw of darkness that surged upward like a rising tide. The light of the moon dimmed, snuffed out by the putting forth of something ancient, something that had been waiting in the void for far too long, and as I teetered on the edge of oblivion, the last thing I saw was the moon's ghastly face twisting into a grotesque smirk. "Your destiny unfolds," it whispered, and then all at once, everything went black. I woke up gasping, a flood of wet, choking air filling my lungs, splattering my senses with a mixture of panic and perspiration. The remnants of those shadows gnawed at my heart like salty, bitter tears as I tried to comprehend my surroundings. The walls closing in felt familiar, cold metal enclosures, a filmy sheen reflecting the dim light. I was back in the control room of the station, the familiar interface screens flickering incoherently before me. Yet, everything felt wrong. Disoriented, I could scarcely accept the sight of the abandoned controls and the hum of machinery, remnants of my day-to-day life at the edge of the solar system. I clutched the edge of the console, heart hammering furiously in my chest as the realization washed over me. I had returned, but to what end? Emotions surged through me, a kaleidoscope of past nightmares and half-remembered faces buried deep within the recesses of my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the images to recede, wishing for the sweet release of the oblivion I thought I had escaped. That it took a moment, but as I steadied my resolve, a viral dread sank into my bones, reminding me the void had never truly relinquished me. My heart raced, and when I opened my eyes once more, the shadows crept out of the darkness, feasting hungrily on my terror. The control room felt electrified and alive, drawing closer, suffocating in a ghostly embrace, echoes of the past mingling with the air. I pushed myself up from the console, staring wide-eyed at the unyielding blackness that filled the corners of the space. Purposefully crafted screens hovered by like malignant sentinels, and as they flickered on, images began to flash through horrific faces pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in silent torment. The shadows whispered my name, a thousand voices now mingled into one incomprehensible echo. I staggered back, fighting against the urge to scream as I spun on my heel to escape their grasp, but the door that had now been my sole chance for freedom swung shut with an ominous clang, vanishing into the inky blackness of the control room. Desperation clawed at my throat as I slammed my fists against the metal door, willing it to release me once more. But all at once, my ears pricked up as a new sound took shape, a low growl, reverberating like thunder cracking down on a sunless horizon. "Join us," came the articulate cadence, unmistakably resonating from the hollow abyss. The shadows thickened, stretching toward me, shapeless and insatiable. A wave of icy cold swept over me as I felt the past unfurl, the shadowed figures amalgamating into familiar forms, friends, family, loved ones lost to darkness, their faces twisting into desperate expressions. "No!" I shouted, recoiling as images of my life merged into one chaotic onslaught, memories interwoven with every regret and betrayal flooding my mind. The child screaming out for help, my own likeness twisted in agony. It all coalesced into a singular realization that sank into my bones, a truth forged in a foundry of blame and sorrow. "I can't," I whimpered, stumbling backward until I hit the wall, feeling the oppressive gloom closing in, suffocating me in a shroud of despair. It wasn't merely my fight, this darkness desired every piece of me, every ounce of pain I was trying to transcend. "Join us," they urged again, but this time, the syllables wrapped around me like the shroud of a spectral blanket, where comfort and torment intertwined. I had thought I could sever my ties with the past, but here I was, trapped between the realms, where every choice led to immeasurable agony. I felt the shadows swirling to a new rhythm, the thrum rising into a deafening crescendo. Their bodies unfurled, taking on shapes of monstrous significance, each movement twisted in unholy delight, as if they relished in my torment. What had once felt like escape now bore the stench of betrayal. I was neither here nor there, suspended in a nightmare of my own making. Just then, a figure emerged from the masses, its visage grotesquely familiar. There stood my doppelganger from the void. An odious reflection that had been born from every shadow of guilt and failure I had tried so desperately to suppress. It stepped forward, fingers curling around my throat with persuasion laced in menace. "Freedom awaits, if only you would join us," it hissed, a twisted smile stretching over lips that mirrored my own. I could feel my resolve wane, my will stretched thin, battling against the years of anguish, sorrow and self-loathing, clawing its way up from within. Will it ever end? I gasped, voice trembling, as I felt the cocoon of darkness beginning to tighten its grip. "Never," the voice taunted. The shadows swelled around me, a monstrous tide rising from the abyss, cutting off any hope of escape. I shut my eyes tight, trying to gather my strength, to forge a path through this overwhelming soul-churning tide. That I opened my eyes again, feeling tears cascading down my cheeks, and I pressed my palm against the console before me. This was not just a dream or a nightmare, this was my reckoning, my battle with the very essence of myself, the dark specters of those I had wronged. It was then that clarity surged like a blaze in my heart. I could confront my past. "Let them go," I roared, voice rising with an authority forged in the depths of anguish. "You have no power over me." But the shadows roared back, a deafening wail enveloping me in chaos, their anger palpable, like lightning surging through the air. The familiar growl echoed again, deeper and darker, reverberating through the foundation of the station. It felt like the very walls were betraying me, ready to crush me under the weight of despair. "Join us!" they screamed, but I focused, pouring my growing strength into the words, willing the light to pierce through the enveloping dark. Suddenly, the shadows rippled, folding into themselves, and the control room began to warp and shift, a disorienting wave of energy thrashing like a storm. Then, I remembered the faces, the cries of those left behind, the anguished shadow of the child. "No more!" I shouted again, channeling that agonizing memory as my will ignited brighter than any shadow could muster. Light exploded forth from the console, a blinding, brilliant surge that pushed against the encroaching darkness, sending the shadows scurrying back in horror. The screams transformed, morphing into shrieks of panic as the energy enveloped me, wrapping around me like a cocoon of warmth. "This is my choice. I will carve a path to freedom," I declared, ready to shatter the bond that connected me to the shadows, the unholy pact that had begun with my own suffering. But as the light neared the walls, another echo responded, one not of hope, but an ominous taunting hum. "You're too late," it said, echoing through the control room, trembling echoes dancing off the metallic walls. "This is your prison. Your legacy." In that moment, just as the light gained momentum, I felt the walls of the control room crack, fissures radiating outward into a darkness filled with a palpable dread. My heart seized as the console flickered, those shadows summoned forth by every regret I had sealed within. Reality began to buckle, distorting around me. The station at the edge of the solar system was not merely a prison of steel and metal, it was housing something else, something far more insidious. Through the tearing veil, the void interrupted, pouring in as if to reclaim its dominion. Alone, in that unforgiving moment, background memories surged like a carnival of despair, leaving behind naught but echoes of futility. Yet as the shadows gathered strength to thwart the rising light of resolution, I steadied my breath and stood firm at the edge of their onslaught. In an instant of clarity, I realized the horrifying truth. The true horror had never belonged to the station, nor the corridors of my own suffering, but had been rooted deep within me, feeding on every fear, every fragment of sorrow. I had been its vessel all along. A final surge of energy burst forth, engulfing the room in a blinding eruption that swallowed everything whole: my fear, my regrets, my shadows. As light incinerated the darkness, I felt the echoes of their voices begin to unravel, fluttering away like autumn leaves in a whirlwind. But just before the last vestiges succumbed, that haunting voice murmured, "You think you are free now, but I am not just within, I am also outside." The light faded, laughter echoing in its wake, and although I had managed to sever my ties with the shadows, an internal victory, a chilling realization shattered my newly claimed peace. I may have escaped the shadows of my own making, but now, in their absence, something far darker lingered, waiting at the thresholds of my new reality, and as the oppressive silence began to settle around me once more, a whisper echoed from somewhere deep within, pleading, taunting, welcome back. There is nowhere to hide.